Hello, I am really delighted to introduce Lisa Argyle and Ethan Busby. Lisa and Ethan are both assistant professors of political science at Brigham Young University. In addition to researching how people talk about politics, Lisa is a computational social scientist who thinks about how to apply computational tools to political challenges like polarization. And very relatedly, and just as relevant to our times, Ethan's work focuses on what leads to and can possibly decrease political extremism. What brings them here today is their shared interest not in just understanding politics, but applying that knowledge to improve our political discourse. Thank you for doing that, you two. Early last year, as ChatGPT came on the scene, and I think everyone in this space was trying to make sense of how AI would rock civic society, Lisa and Ethan published a paper on an AI chat assistant that was an early indicator of AI's potential to actually do some good, and accordingly was a fairly hot paper in academic circles. We're really excited that both of them are able to join us here today. And Ethan, let me start with you. Tell us about the chat assistant that you created. And in particular, we're curious to hear about the core principles from social psychology, behavioral science that went into developing the AI model it uses.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very, very happy to share our work and very flattered at your interest and your praise. We're you're very gracious and very kind to us about our research. We started with sort of a general idea about like, what can we do with artificial intelligence that could improve politics, could improve political conversations. As we started to try and employ that, we quickly said, well, we had to focus on improve in what way, like along what dimension do we think that the tool could be useful? What could it produce that's good? We drew mostly from research, two strands of research. One strand of research focused more on political science and sort of deliberative theories of democracy, about the importance of conversations, about the benefits of talking with other people and engaging with other people when it comes to politics. And then we drew also from social science and about, in the psychology, about the importance of feeling understood by other people. About perceptions of understanding, increasing feelings of other people, understanding your perspective, even if they don't agree with you. And that came mostly from sort of psychology, social psychology, and some sort of relational psychology work about even in couples, romantic relationships, the importance of hearing other people, feeling understood. And from that's where we sort of drew our inspiration. That's where we drew the theoretical ideas that drove the chatbot, that helped us to develop what did we want it to do? What kinds of things do we hope it could accomplish? And more or less, again, we drew from those two foundations as a way to say, let's get the chatbot to try and help other people feel heard, to try and help people engage with others in a way that feels validating, in a way that feels, even if we have different views, so that you at least feel like I've understood you, that I can engage with your perspective and understand it, even if I ultimately disagree. And those were sort of our guiding principles in terms of developing the model itself. We used GPT-3 at the time. This was before we had access to ChatGPT before ChatGPT was released when we started developing this model. But I think many of the same principles can be applied with various language models in terms of helping the model engage with others or helping you engage with other people sort of as an assistant to help that other person feel like you understand them.
Fantastic. And so Lisa, Ethan already started to talk a little bit about this, but you've obviously, since you're researchers, you've done some work to not only develop a tool, but figure out if it works. So you could talk a little bit about how you know it works. And part of that is, of course, along what Ethan was talking about, defining more about what it means, what success means. So what are the goals or hope for impacts of the chat assistant? And again, how do you know it's successful, or how do you hope to discover more that it's successful?
Great. Yeah, as you mentioned, we're researchers, so we did a randomized controlled trial, which I won't go into a lot of the detail there, but basically we brought people into a conversation. We recruited them using sort of like online recruitment platform companies. And we recruited them to take a survey and then into a conversation. And half of these people were having a conversation where throughout the conversation, they were getting some prompts. And so they would write a message to send to their partner, but we sort of intercepted it before it actually went to their partner and said, well, you said you wanted to say this thing. What if you said this instead? Or we just gave them 3 other options. All of them, as Ethan said, are sort of like research-based ways of other things they could have said instead. And it was very important to us as we designed this that we left all of the agency with the people in the conversations. And so we wanted to make sure they still had all of the choice about what message they wanted to send to their partner. So they could edit any of the messages, they could send their original message exactly as it was, or they could choose any of these sort of alternatives. And we find about 2/3 of the time people picked one of these alternatives and sent it. And then we were looking at, does this make a better conversation? And as you mentioned, that means we have to decide what we're looking for. What makes a good conversation? All of these conversations are on the topic of gun control in the United States. And we're pairing two people who disagree with each other on that topic. And so there's a lot of room for a very divisive conversation. One of the things that we hope to get out of it is that we wanted people to sort of, as Ethan was describing, we wanted them to listen to the other person. We wanted them to help the other person feel understood and respected in the conversation. And sort of building on democratic theories, we're hoping that leads to more respect for disagreement in a democratic society, that other people can have a different political position than me, and it is okay for them to express it and advocate for it, even if at the end of the day we don't agree. So that's sort of the democratic principle that we were hoping to get to. And so we have a bunch of survey measures of those kinds of attitudes that we ask at the end of the conversation. But we were also really interested in building an AI tool in a way that the language model was not inserting its position, was not biasing or influencing the conversation. And so people's attitudes do change over the course of the conversation, but we didn't want that to be driven by AI. And so it was important to us that it was not persuasive, that people don't change their mind more. So at the end of the day, they still disagree just as much as they did if they hadn't had this tool, but they have more respect for the other side and for the other person in the conversation. And they themselves feel, the partners of the people who are getting this tool feel like they're better understood, they're better heard, they're better listened to. And so they have a better experience in the conversation because of that.
So fantastic. And we shared it in the invitation, but if people want to dig into more into the research and how the tool works, I'll share again in the chat. You can go link to the article. It's, yeah, just fascinating. But so Ethan, let's go back to you and talk about the tool, the application of the tool or the possibilities. So again, you're academics, not technologists, but I'm sure when you created this tool, your hope or expectations that it or similar bots would be used in the real world. So can you talk a little bit about what you see as the potential for its adoption or similar similar assistance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we thought a lot about this. If you read the paper, even part of the beginning of the paper talks about the magnitude of online conversations that occur in places like Facebook Messenger or whatever social media platform you might prefer. And so I think there's a lot of ways, any place where there are people interacting with each other through the internet, through some app, I think there's the possibility for this to be implemented. How and where, I think there's really interesting questions about where is it appropriate, where might we not want it to be deployed. But I think we envision this as showing us the ways in which AI tools can be employed in a variety of settings. People are already having conversations. We don't view this as like we need to now make a new space for people to come and talk where they weren't already talking before. I think instead we think of this as like a tool that could be used in the places where people are already talking to each other online. And we've started to explore a little how we could do this through text messaging too. That's where sort of in the early stages of development of that particular tool. But again, our idea is that places where people are already having conversations are ways where we could use AI tools to try and improve the tenor or the results or the consequences of the conversations that are already occurring among people online. So again, we can think of lots of variety, whether it's whatever your favorite messaging app is, if it's Facebook Messenger, if it's some kind of direct messaging system through another social media site or WhatsApp or GroupMe or whatever. There's lots of these platforms that exist, and I think there are ways they could be deployed in all of those settings.
So fantastic. And so I think, so last question to you, Lisa, and I think you might kind of incorporate or follow up with a little bit of Ethan's discussion. We at PDN, we think that research has a lot to share, but also a lot to learn from practitioners. So what are questions that you have for folks or the technologists, practitioners here who work on social media or other platforms that they can perhaps answer in the Q&A or in the breakouts, and it could be related to that adoption question of how this, I think great tool could be possibly integrated into existing platforms.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we are really excited to get the feedback from all of you and to get some of your perspective in what this might look like in other kinds of contexts beyond our sort of limited but very informative survey experiment context. One of the things that we've talked a lot about as we think about how do we scale this or how do we take this in other places is the limitations that we have in the current study. So a lot of my questions are sort of around things that we see as limitations or things that we just don't have a lot of information about yet. And so we don't know what it would look like. And we're very interested, and we don't have the resources to sort of endlessly test all of the different variations on this design. Certainly one of those questions is about scaling this to non-anonymous conversations. And so what does this look like when people are in their real lives and talking to people they know? In the conversations they're having with us, it's completely anonymous. They know absolutely nothing about the other person they're having a conversation with. And so what does this look like if you're having a conversation with a friend, a neighbor, a spouse? And we imagine that's probably different, but we'd love to hear some of your perspective and thinking about that. Another big question for us is that the landscape of large language models and artificial intelligence has changed dramatically since we did this. As Ethan mentioned, we used GPT-3 and we designed this study prior to the release of ChatGPT. And so it wasn't like a thing that people in the public were really aware of. We told them there was some artificial intelligence behind it, but like that didn't have any meaning in the social world in which we conducted this experiment. And so sort of how do we think about trust in AI tools? How do we think about perceptions of those tools if we were to roll this out on a large scale? And I think the last question is sort of on the design side, is how do we get uptake of it? How do we roll it out? How do we think about how and how often to intervene? So in our conversations, it's actually just a regularistic thing that like basically every other message, is more complicated than that, but basically every other message, the language model is intervening and giving suggestions. But there are obviously a lot of other ways we could do that, with flagging particular kinds of content or intervening in other ways. And thinking about sort of the design side of, do we intervene before or after people have said things? And how do we get sort of their consent and buy-in, including the trust of the AI? I think those are some of the many big questions we have as we think about how this moves to other contexts.
Wonderful. Okay, we will be turning over to Q&A in a moment. I am going to first, however, stop the video.